All right, welcome. My name is Dr. Sakina Hughes, and I'm Assistant Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Director of Africana Studies, and the Chair of the College of Liberal Arts Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Today we have a full day of events lined up for you at the College of Liberal Arts' first EDIC teach-in. This teach-in was devised and developed over that long, difficult, devastating year of 2020. We as a committee knew we had to do something to help our community and ourselves begin to process all the social and political unrest that was going on. With the election on the way and a real threat of violence, we wanted to do something to foster community togetherness and the spirit of social justice. Then with the events of January 6th, we knew we had a big job ahead of us and knew even more, if that was possible, that we need to do more listening, learning, and understanding. So these events we have scheduled today reflect that need to listen, learn, and understand. First, we have a panel on immigration. So this teach-in is a campus effort, and I would like to thank Dean Beebe of the College of Liberal Arts, the Office of the President, the Office of the Provost, the College of Nursing and Health Professions, the Pott College of Science, Engineering, and Education, the Romaine College of Business, and Housing and Residence Life. I would also like to thank my co-chair, Dr. Chrislyn Shevlin, and everyone on the LA Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. It's been a real joy to work with you all, and I'm truly thankful to have such a great team. And finally, I would like to thank all of our guests, both from USI and many other universities and organizations. This event could not have happened without your support and your generous willingness to share your time, skill, and wisdom. So now, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Shri Dantakar, who will introduce and moderate our first panel on immigration. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakina. My name is Shrikant Dandotkar. Shri, I'm a faculty member, assistant professor of psychology at USI. Well, today's discussion is of this panel is about immigration and the role of immigration on college campuses. I would like to introduce our panelists, and when I take their name, I want them to say hi so they can see your face, then I can talk about yourself for a second, talk about you for a second. So our first panelist is Cesar Berrios. Can you say hi, Cesar?
Hi, how's it going?
Okay. So Cesar is the program advisor in the Multicultural Center at USI and a doctoral candidate in educational leadership. Then we have Angela Adams. Can you say hi, Angela? Okay. Okay, I think, can you unmute yourself so people can see you when you say hi? I just want to.
Sorry. Hi.
Perfect. So they can attach the name to your face. Okay. Angela is the owner and the managing attorney of the Adams Immigration Law, and she's been working for years with USI on immigration issues specific to students, faculty, staff, and administrators, I guess. And then we have our own student, Carlos Mayser. Can you say hi, Carlos?
Hello, how are you?
Cool. He's originally from Bolivia and is a USI student, and he's pursuing his master's in public administration. And he's already working for Catholic Charities Diocese, did I pronounce it correctly, of Evansville, and does immigration services helping primarily students. So these are our panelists. I'm going to give a quick overview of why we are here, and then we get started with the question. Towards the end, the plan is to open the floor for any questions from the audience. So just to give a context, this is about diversity, and this initiative is a part of the College of Liberal Arts Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And when you think about diversity and think about America, they sound and seems like they're synonymous, right? But America is not the most diverse country in the world. In fact, it is ranked 150 based on a recent analysis. However, when you look at the history, you'll realize that America was formed by immigrants, developed by immigrants, modernized by immigrants, and is being constantly shaped by the immigrants, so it stays as the most advanced nation in the world. No wonder we call it an immigrant nation. Yet, immigrants have been an easy target of political establishment for years, of course, for their own benefits, partly because it's easy to incite a false narrative that immigration is inherently against national interests. The truth is, America was a land of opportunities even before it was formed, and it will continue to stay so. It is an immigrant nation, and immigrants are primarily why America is diverse beyond doubt. While we can discuss the irrationality of political establishments in inciting such a false narrative, we will focus on today on the efforts of immigration changes that a recent administration has established or adapted, and how that changed the life of immigrants on college campuses. So, on that note, I'll get started with the first question. It is for Angela. Angela, what specific immigration changes do you think have happened during the Trump administration? And how did it impact your clients basically on campuses like faculty, students, and staff?
Mhm. Well, where do I begin? I think at last count, there were about over 45 different immigration changes that were done by executive action under the Trump administration. So needless to say, the last 4 years have been extremely challenging, to say the least, for immigration practitioners and immigrants in general. Not just immigrants, but also the employers that employ them, like USI, like industries that need workers because there aren't enough, there's a labor shortage in certain industries. So it's been very challenging. The tone has been challenging. We've seen increased requests for evidence, increased denials on cases that were once approvable. So as an immigration practitioner, it's very disheartening because when you thought you knew how to present a case successfully, and then everything changed overnight, literally, in the last administration. So we have been trying to keep updated, to stay alert, because literally overnight something could change. And that has been extremely frustrating as an immigration practitioner. Keeping our ear to the ground on various things, some specific things that have affected students, faculty, and others were DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals. Under the Trump administration, they made every effort to end the DACA program. And so DACA students in general were just in limbo, not knowing whether the program was going to continue, not knowing whether they were going to be able to renew. They quit accepting initial DACA applications, so no one could file a new DACA application. That has since changed. Under the Biden administration, they're making efforts to expand and improve the DACA program, and so we're very hopeful about that. That impacts students directly, and some faculty, frankly, because DACA are no longer just students, right? The DACA program's been around for 10 years now, so these are mostly adults that have been impacted by the DACA program and the changes. Family reunification, as was in the news, you saw that families were being separated at the border. Folks that were coming to the US to seek refuge, to seek asylum, because they had been persecuted in their home country on the basis of religion, nationality, political opinion, social group, any of those reasons. And when they arrived at the border, many of them were frankly separated from their families and their children. And so there's been an effort now under the Biden administration to reunify those families and find them and make sure that they're back together. there were, yeah, go ahead.
So we'll come back to the changes in the Biden administration,
Okay,
or
sorry.
the revision. No, it's okay. That's fine. Thank you so much, Angela. Now I'm going to move to Cesar. How do you think these changes during Trump administration, Cesar, affected the students, the DACA students, or students in general, emotionally, financially, and otherwise?
Yeah, so there definitely was a lot of fear, especially those students who had some sort of immigration status that was not permanent. What I mean by that, if they were not permanent residents or U.S. citizens, and they had some sort of temporary status like DACA or even TPS, which is temporary protective status, um, those are statuses that can be taken away at any time, or temporary. And there is always that fear. There is that fear with the new that with that administration, that they weren't sure if they were going to be able to continue their education. With that fear, that fear not only was not only for the students but also for the families, right? The families had put in a lot, had invested a lot of money into their education, because those with those type of visas, also not visas, I'm sorry, but with those type of statuses, they're not eligible for some of the state and federal grants or scholarships that are available for others. So these immigrant families are having to put money into their child's education out of pocket. So obviously there's that fear, right? There's that fear that it has all this investment gone to waste, or am I going to be deported? So I had discussions with some students where they were fearful that they're not gonna be able to continue their education, or if they had to maybe even move back home, or the even worse, the fear of them being able to be deported at any time. So obviously that affect the students in a lot of different ways. From an academic standpoint, how can you focus on your studies whenever your main concern is whether you're going to be deported or not, or if your status that kept you documented was going to all of a sudden be gone, and now you were in I guess in um, not better off, you're going to be worse off. So yes, that there was that fear from students. There was there was even sometimes of talk of seeing a counselor, just trying to deal with their emotions and not being able to figure out what they were going to do. And this took a while. I mean, that even at some point it got a little bit better, but for the 4 years, there was always that constant fear of what's going to happen next. What is going to happen to me? And at times, there in immigration, you kind of see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Um, with the conversations that I had, I feel like a lot of students did not have that vision of that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, the fear of um, deportation hanging over their head all the time. And on top of that, like any other students, they have to work. That's the financial difficulties. Now, when I talk about financial difficulties, we know, Carlos, you work with with students on the renewal process, right? So I'm going to ask this question: how do you think it impacted the administration changes during the last 4 years, the DACA renewal process, or the citizenship application process, or other things related to your work? Have you experienced any new changes during that time, and or challenges?
Yeah, during that time, like Cesar and Angela were saying, the time was, a lot of people were freaking out because they didn't know what was going to happen. So for the renewal, uh, as we knew, it could end at any moment, any minute, if any of the judge would decide to end DACA. But for the renewal, people were student, and people that weren't student were able to renew their DACA, but not knowing if it was going to be approved or not, because like Angela also said, so many changes happened during those 4 years with Trump administration, and there were no initial DACA for those new DACA that were able to apply, and now there is. So if you know somebody, you need to tell them to apply as soon as possible, because like I say, the program can end at any moment. So we don't know that, but it did impact a lot because people were scared, and people are still scared because they can end the program. It's not up to the president now. And they were able to ask permission to leave the country. And during Trump administration, they end that program. So right now they weren't able to leave. And right now we will see what happens. And for other applications that we do, like for example, citizenship or renewing a green card or family petition or petition abroad, trying to bring a family member to the country, a lot of those programs have slowed down so much. Like renewing a green card didn't take over a year. Now it's taking over a year. It used to take a couple months, and people are thinking, oh, my green card is expired now, and I don't have a legal status in the country, which even if expired, you are fine, but people don't know that for citizenship application, it's taking forever, and also the pandemic come, and it's taking even longer. So those factors are, besides Trump and the pandemic, it went so slow that, it's people were calling off, people were not working. So I think it's both the pandemic and the previous administration that slowed things down. But hopefully with the vaccines and all of that, everything get back to normal soon, or some kind of normal, because a lot of people don't have that time to be waiting that long because they need things to do, or maybe go back home to see a family member who is sick. And so people are experiencing very different challenge that somebody who is a citizen doesn't know, because they're not sure what was going on with those people, because they don't know what, like Cesar was saying, deportation is a big fear for anyone. So there are being many changes, and probably it's going to be some more, hopefully soon.
Thank
If
you.
I could just add something just real quick, in regard to deportation, and I think that sometimes people don't really understand how real that is, in that there were immigration raids.
Let me put this.
There were immigration raids in certain areas, and I did have some students that were fearful that they were going to be, around their town or in their town, and parents were fearful that their student their son or daughter was away if something were to happen. So it did happen. Some people were deported, and that increased the fear even more.
Can I add one thing too? I just got a general poll that popped up here.
Sorry,
Okay.
that was from me.
That's okay. I wanted to add too, it didn't just impact students. We have faculty at various universities who are waiting for their employment authorization cards to arrive. And because they're taking between 5 and 7 months, and the receipt notices have been taking almost 3 months to issue, we have faculty who don't know if they can be in the classroom in the next few months, and may have to take a leave of absence. And that is devastating to the students and the universities.
Thank you, Angela and Cesar. Carlos, we know that Carlos is helping students to work on these issues at a cheaper cost and affordable cost. So we're going to put his email address in the chat. I think Christina can help us with that. The next question, coming back to Angela, is what were the most important changes that the new administration is trying to kind of not implement, but mostly revise and bring it back to what they were originally? And what else need to be done before we get back to where we were 4 years ago?
Mm-hmm. So let me just say, first of all, where we were 4 years ago was also not ideal, because we desperately needed immigration reform, and and I have been working many years on trying to get immigration reform in DC with other groups and national organizations. So it wasn't ideal, but it progressively got worse under the Trump administration. So I think the Biden administration is trying to reverse things that they can do by executive order, because as you may know, immigration is federal law. So it's not the states, but the federal government that needs to make the changes. And the president doesn't have the authority to make all these changes. There's limited authority under executive power. Any legislative or law changes need to be done through Congress. And so the president is trying to undo some of the things that the executive branch did under the previous administration, like undoing the Muslim bans and the bans from certain African countries, revamping the asylum system. They canceled the public charge requirements. So the public charge that went into effect under the Trump administration, they have reversed that. DACA and family reunification. So some of those things, but they're still not enough because Congress essentially needs to step in and make some permanent solution changes. For example, DACA. DACA is not a permanent solution. DACA is an interim solution that doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship. There's no status, if you will. DACA is just saying, we're not going to deport you. We know you're here. We're going to give you employment authorization. We're not going to deport you, but it doesn't give you a permanent status. So Congress needs to step in. And I believe in these days, maybe even today, the Biden administration will be proposing a comprehensive package to Congress, but pay attention to votes, because although Democrats have control in the House and technically in the Senate with 50-50, and then a tiebreaker being the vice president, you need 60 votes to pass certain legislation. So whether or not we get immigration reform will depend on whether the technicalities and the voting and how many votes are needed and whether we can get those votes and get enough Republicans to vote for an immigration reform package. So we're hopeful. I'm more hopeful now than I've been in a long time. And we just have to stay the course and keep supporting those who support good policy changes.
And just to kind of clarify this, our panelists, including myself, we are not supporting one political party or the other. Not at all. The discussion here is pertinent to the fact that the changes in the previous administration were so horrible that it affected our lives, and the current administration is trying to reverse them. And it could have been reversed. It could have been a Democratic and a Republican Party, or vice versa. It's not the party line discussion that we were having right here. It's about the administrative changes that happened in the last 4 years, and that we're trying to reverse it currently. So I just wanted to make that clear. This discussion is not along party lines. This is actually a general issue. So coming to ask the same question to Cesar, these changes, the new changes that the current administration is trying to bring back, how has that affected students directly? And what else you think need to be done for students?
Yeah, I think that, like Angela said, I think people are starting to be a little bit more hopeful. They're starting to see like, okay, there's this conversation is happening again, but in a positive way, in a way that maybe in the near future, something can be a little bit more permanent for me. And I'm speaking specifically about, students who have DACA or TPS or just aren't documented. Just there's no documentation that they have. So I think that they're definitely looking at this as a good conversation, a good change, and it's something that it's not only more than likely not only going to benefit them, but their entire family. And that's even better news for them, right? Because a lot of students, and some even students that I speak with who are U.S. citizens, born U.S. citizens, but their families, may have a temporary status or no status at all. They're still worried about them. So that obviously impacts their academics as well and their experience in college, because they're worried about their parents, their mom, their dad, maybe grandparents or uncles, whatever it may be. So I definitely think that there's a little bit more hope for them, and that they're not as worried that, something's going to happen. As far as what can be done, I think that continuing to provide resources for these students to make sure that they understand what they need to do. So for example, knowing attorneys in the area or people like Carlos that can help them, and just that, so they understand, because a lot of the issues is that sometimes the resources aren't there, or they're misinformed. And unfortunately, that does happen sometimes, where they hear one thing and it's not accurate, and then they jump to it. Or sometimes they're like, I'm going to fill out this form and pay this much, and it's like, no, don't. It's like, don't do that. Don't ever pay for anything that you don't know where it's coming from, unless it's from an attorney or a valid source, right? So I think that the more information that we can give the students, the more resources we can give them, and support them along the way. Show them that they have somebody that's there for them, that is supporting them along the way, even if they're not the attorney, right, helping them in the immigration status, but they feel like they have somebody at the university or in the community that is supporting them every step of the way, so that they know that they're not by themselves. I think it's a huge improvement for them.
So on that note, Carlos, from working with the students on their renewal process and other things in last 4 years, and it is just starting to change, and how is that affecting your work with your clients?
So one thing that I did while I'm still going to school at USI, I have one more class left. I did a paper about immigration for one of my class, because public administration federal is related to that. So it was about refugees and asylees. So from 2004, it was about 9 to 10 years, the revenue that the government made from them, it was 65 billion. And people think, oh, they just come and they get help from the government for a little bit the first year. But after that, they're working, they have their family here, they're working, they're paying taxes and all of that. And it's like you helping them, but at the same time they're helping you. Imagine if they give a way to citizenship to those 11 million people that are in the country, how much money is going to come into the country, and how much, and they come here to work. They don't come here to be under the government, like a lot of people benefit from it, and they play the system. So, I mean, there are things that people don't know, and same thing with taxes, that immigrants do pay taxes. They just don't know how they do it. It's different. But if you want to know that, you can you can look into it or ask me, and which is a little complicated, because U.S. citizens don't know about ITIN, which is an identification tax ID number. That's how they pay taxes. And everybody that get a paycheck, they get in their Social Security, federal, state, taking away from their check. So it's, and if they don't do their taxes, they're not gonna get their money back. So it's like, where is that money going if I don't do my taxes? Like, people don't know that. Some people may know, some people may not. But hopefully with this new administration, like Angela was saying, 4 years before Trump, it wasn't that great. I mean, there are things that hasn't been changed for decades, and probably if they don't do something, it will never change. For example, if I'm a U.S. citizen, or if I'm not, and I marry a U.S. citizen, we have kids and all of that, and I cross the border, I try to get my papers through my spouse, I had to leave the country and come back to be able to get my green card. But at the same time, I have that fear that I may not be able to come back and not see my family. So that's something that was back in 2001. And it's not, like you were saying, this is not a Republican or Democrat panel. And it's like, it's from both parties. They only did it at that time because that's what they thought was right. But time change, it's different. Things need to change. But hopefully, people are more hopeful that this administration will do something, and hopefully. But as we know, previous years ago, when they did 2 reforms, it was under the Republicans. So hopefully this time it will be under the Democrat, but we'll see what happens. So there are still a lot of challenge with this new administration, but hopefully the process will speed up, and we won't get as many as denials like we were having before, and hopefully it's a little more easy to go forward with them.
So Angela, on that note, I want you to kind of give a perspective on the public charge a requirement for the green card applications, and how that would negatively impact the faculty, staff, and students on campus, but also the universities to hire people. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. So public charge is not a new concept. Public charge has always been a requirement that you show that you make enough money, or that you have a sponsor that makes enough money to support you if you ever receive public benefits. So this is something that we've done forever. I mean, I've been practicing since 2004, and it's always been part of the package. what happened was they made an additional form, the I-944 form, which asked all kinds of additional questions and made it what's called a totality of the circumstances test, and a discretionary, whether an immigration officer could say, well, I think you are old, and so you're going to get public benefits. Like, there are all these factors that could come into play. And so it made it more possible for an officer to exercise discretion in a subjective way. And that they've ended that, but it's still a requirement that you have to do the affidavit of support and prove that you're making enough money. So the way it impacted folks is, you know, if someone was receiving free and reduced lunch, for example, someone's children at the schools, that could be a factor. If they started asking for credit reports, if someone had a negative credit report, that could be a factor. If someone didn't, you know, have means to pay their debts, that could be a factor. So anything could be a factor. So that was part of the frustration, is they expanded this notion of public charge so that it was further, I guess, restrictive, more restrictive than it had been previously.
And also impacted the income requirements for
Yes.
for the universities to hire. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the income requirement is you have to make enough money to support your family, the household members in your family. And so some, you know, if one spouse is working or someone is a single parent of 3 children, for example, that's a family of 4 or 5, you may or may not meet the guideline, that income guideline, to support what they think is ability to support your family members. And so that could be a factor in determining whether or not you meet that guideline.
And it becomes even more harder if the company we are talking about is a university, because university university staff and faculty are paid the least. So it's
or a nonprofit, any nonprofit, really.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I think we can open our floor for questions from the audience. We have a full 15 minutes to answer the questions. Christina, are you ready with questions from the audience?
We've got 2 questions in our Q&A. And the first one is, I think, multi-part. So I will start by saying that you guys may have answered this, but it's promising to hear all of the good changes that are underway with the Biden administration. There's still more work to do. So now that the immediate fear is gone, and fear is a motivating factor, how do we encourage people in these communities who had unclear or illegal status, but also outside of them, to continue to fight? I'll start with that. So how do we encourage people to continue that fight?
Who is going to take that?
So, I wanted to piggyback on something that Sri said earlier, that this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. And I think it's really, really important to remember that, because although, you know, we speak in terms of politics, because at the end of the day, it is a political issue. And at the end of the day, it does matter who is in power and whether things can get done or not, or whether they're going to, you know, stop things from getting done. So it's important to point out that we need to also influence not just Democrats, but Republicans, and also recognize those Republican leaders who support immigration reform, and let them know that they are doing the right thing and that we will still support them if they vote in favor of immigration reform. That's really important, because this is not a partisan issue. In fact, in the past, if you look historically at immigration laws have, whatever laws have changed, have been done by either party. Some of the worst immigration reforms were passed during a Democrat as president. So it really depends on the makeup of Congress, the president, and what's going on in the world, really. I mean, pre 9/11, we had some more as you were talking about, Carlos, 245I was in 2001. That was under a Republican president. And so, but then 9/11 happened and everything changed. So my point is, how can we keep the fight? I think recognizing that this is not a strictly, Democrat versus Republican. We need to find common ground and find things that we can agree on so that we can get some legislation that pushes the needle forward.
Thank you. And I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that, but if not, I'll ask the second part, which is, what are the immediate issues that need to be addressed?
I think from a student standpoint is kind of going back to what I had mentioned before, helping these students understand what the resources are. I think that there are some in the area and definitely throughout the state, Indiana specifically, if we look at students who live in the state of Indiana. And I think providing those resources to them is really important. So that I think that's the immediate need. Because if something does happen, we want to make sure, if in a positive way, if there is some that is passed, or there, like Carlos saying and was saying, that the DACA has been extended and more students can apply for it, or just individuals in general, we want to make sure that they know who to go to, because there's that fear of uncertainty. Actually, I had a conversation with a student not too long after the election, and you would think that some people, specific immigrants, would be a little bit more excited because there was these positive changes that were coming. But from what I heard from a student was, it said, I hear this all the time, and nothing ever happens. And there's still that fear of, and maybe not fear, well, part of it, but the other part is it happens so much, and immigration has been an issue for so long, and nothing has changed, that regardless of party, nothing has happened, and immigrants continue to feel like they're just being brushed. They're used for political reasons at certain times, and then they're just brushed under the rug. And they're just like, look, until there's something in front of me that says that I can apply, I'm not going to believe it, or I'm not going to be hopeful. And to me, that's a little disheartening. That's a little sad to hear, because it's like all their motivation, all their hope is completely gone because of so many years of essentially nothing being done. But I think that by providing the resources to them, even now, like right now, there's nothing they can apply for unless there's DACA or something that they're eligible for. But just providing those additional resources for them that they can seek, I think would be very helpful. Because sometimes they don't have them. They just don't know where to go.
Yeah, like Cesar was saying, like you have to be very careful where you go, because a lot of times people try to take advantage of people, and they look for people that are called notarios, which back in our countries like South America or Central America, notarios are kind of like lawyers. Some of them are not, and they say they know what they're doing. A lot of times they mess people up, and then their immigration paperwork is messed up, and then that can cause a denial, or put you in deportation. And also a lot of times people think, oh, I know what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing, because sometimes the forms look easy, but there are like little things that if you don't do it right, that can be a problem. And there are resources here in Evansville. There are some lawyers. There are some places where they can help you where to go if you need to apply for a certain type of form that you need to do for immigration, because every case is different.
Thank you very much. And we've got a couple more, and they keep coming in, so we'll try to get in what we can. But one I think would be really helpful to everybody in the audience. How can regular community members help? Are there volunteer opportunities available?
I think if there is a reform, I may need help, but right now I could use some help. But if there is a reform, we will see if there is one, or what the administration do. But right now, because of the pandemic and all of that, we're not taking any volunteers or internship. but we'll see in the summer. But I'm sure, around the city, there are some organizations that will take some volunteers or do some internship. I know some lawyers would love some help around here. And there are a few here in Evansville that do immigration paperwork.
I add also, don't underestimate the power of talking to your legislators, of writing a letter or being a voice, because they need to hear from constituents. They need to hear from voters. And so if you vote and if you are a US citizen, then you need to make your voice heard, so that they understand that their constituents are impacted by this issue and how they feel about it.
Thank you. And we might have time for one more. So let's say, how can faculty and staff support their colleagues and students who might be dealing with immigration issues? And I know Cesar touched on it a little bit with the student side, but what about the colleagues potentially?
I think understanding that this is not easy, and it's also an added stress. I mean, a professor is teaching courses and trying to manage their classes and their students, and on top of all of that has an immigration process to deal with, and may or may not have family members or be, it's very, very confusing, and it's a very long process. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to go from one status to another status, and then petition for a green card, and that takes years. So this is not something that is, it's extremely stressful. So I think understanding, and a lot of times they don't talk about it because it's not something you go, you just talk to your friends about your immigration case. So I guess understanding, but not jumping to conclusions. I think being very careful not to assume anything.
One of the questions here says, without a doubt, this panel and this topic are important for students and faculty to learn about. What reason would you tell someone as to why they should care about knowing this information regarding immigration? That's an interesting question. What reason would someone give?
I think I think understanding and having more knowledge about how the immigration system works is very important. I come across a lot of people sometimes that don't understand even just the simple things about immigration and how difficult it is and how it affects families. We always want to affect them in a positive way, right? But a lot of times it can affect them in a negative way as well. So I think just understanding that immigrants who are going through the immigration process, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are struggling financially sometimes, are struggling mentally, just from an emotional standpoint, right? That they're going through a lot. And I think the more that you educate yourself on the matter, I think the better off we would be, because whenever you come across somebody who is an immigrant, is going through the process, you don't have to make those comments of like, well, about doing it the right way, or that, there's just so many little comments that can be very offensive to some immigrants. And I think just understanding how the immigration system works and understanding that they're trying to do this a right way, or sometimes that they're not doing anything at all because they can't do anything at all. So not blaming them and saying, well, why can't you become a citizen like everybody else? Those things can be very offensive, and it can really bring somebody down, because it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they can't. So once again, just educating yourself on immigration law to the extent that you understand the system a little bit more, and that it's not as easy as some people make it out to be. It's not just like you fill out a form to be a U.S. citizen and the next day you're a U.S. citizen, right? There's so many steps. It takes so many years. People, I think, just need to understand that it's not an easy process.
And also, Cesar, you make a really good point. People ask me all the time, why can't they just fix their status? Why do we even need DACA? The whole reason why DACA exists is because those were folks that couldn't fix their status. They don't have any options. The law doesn't provide them with an option to fix their status. And people don't understand that a lot of times. But I think going back to something you said, Cesar, you said families. This comes down to families, which comes down to community. And when you're talking about your community, to make your community a better place, the best community that it can be, You have to embrace everyone and make sure that you're understanding and listening to all of the community members. And I think that's one reason to care about the issue. I think another reason to care about the issue is just in general, because we're neighbors. We're all neighbors, and we need to care about our neighbors and treat each other as we want to be treated. But then if you need even a different kind of reason, look at the economy. And I think the economy is another reason why people should care about immigration, because if we had a good immigration policy, that would in turn create a great economy. And it should. That's the whole idea. Immigration shouldn't bring down the economy. Immigration should help the economy flourish if it's done right. And so those are some kind of basic reasons why anyone should care about immigration.
I would like to add, like the question was like, why they should care about knowing this information regarding immigration. I would say not knowing about immigration may definitely hurt the immigrants themselves, but it will hurt the Americans the most, because it will make and change America to be what it's not, less diverse. And I think this is a good point to close our session because the time is up. Immigration is inherently a part of being or making America what it is, diverse. Any last points before we close? The time is up, but I'm just gonna ask you guys, do you guys have any last points? Anything for the audience? Okay, well, thank you so much, Cesar, Angela, and Carlos. We really, really appreciate your time.